Um, go ahead
All
and
right.
share your
To
presentation.
share my screen, enter slideshow mode here,
Okay.
and make sure I get my
I see
speaker
Vinny.
notes.
Hi, Vinny. We're just getting started. So
There we
I
go.
wanted to do a quick introduction. Eileen,
Mhm.
meet Vinny and Robin. They are our co-founders along with me for zettabytes.today. We, as you know,
Hello again.
are networking organization for LGBTQ plus the tech professionals, both in data and user and everything tech. And straight allies are, of course, welcome. If you're not a Zeta Star already, please do join us for happy hours and become a Zeta Star. You can go to our website and join. And also, let me introduce Eileen a little bit, especially for Matthew and Vinny. Um, I met Eileen quite a few years ago, actually, to think about it, like 2016 or 17, where she is a burlesque theater performer. And I was at Stonewall for an event, and she was presenting. I mean, she was walking around in stilts. That's all I remember. But we started talking.
Sounds about right.
She she is currently the director of application and user interface at CCAD, and very interesting background. Robin and Vinny, people who come from different backgrounds into tech. Robin was a journalist. Vinny was a major in philosophy, and Eileen majored in linguistics. So all the linguistics and coding languages, has some similarity after coding is a language. At least that's the way I see it. But
It
after
sounds good. It sounds good.
so everybody is transitioning from different parts. Yep, transitioning from different parts of the world. Matthew, you, I'm assuming, were not in tech before.
No, I was actually I was in veterinary medicine for 20 years before I went
See,
to tech elevator, so I made the
awesome.
jump. So
So there you go. You don't need computer science background necessarily to make things happen in tech. And with that, I'll let Eileen talk about how to keep us safe
Yeah, well, thanks,
and
Rini.
cybersecurity.
Yeah, so thank you, Rini, for that very nice introduction. So, like she mentioned, I work at the Columbus College of Art and Design, and part of my role is training for our end users, which spans a broad range of experience with the idea of security. And I always try to put an angle on it that is kind of personal, and it's not just how do you keep yourself safe with your work account at your organization, but also what does it mean to be secure as a user of the internet, which is so crucial to everything we do as humans now participating in this society that we live in. So the presentation I'm going to give today is really designed for kind of a look at one's personal as well as professional accounts and just kind of a general overview. So if at any time you have questions, I've got two screens here, so I will hopefully be able to see. Just give me a note in the chat or raise your hand or something. I think, yeah, there is a raise your hand button in WebEx. So yeah, just let me know as we go through it. So without further ado, I will share my screen. And hopefully you can see that okay. And here. All right. So cybersecurity, where do you start? And I just to point out the images on these slides, I put prompts into Adobe Firefly, which is their generative AI tool for images, which we've begun to investigate at an arts and design school. That's obviously the generative AI thing is becoming very important to us to discuss. So I put in a bunch of prompts that said a 3D computer character with some kind of expression. So this is a 3D computer character with an excited expression. So you'll kind of be able to guess what the different expressions were as we go through the slides. So, like I said, the purpose of the presentation is to have you come away with an understanding of what cybersecurity is and what different types of cyber attacks and who the potential perpetrators of those attacks are, and some best practices and good habits to protect yourself and your workplace from cyber attacks. So first of all, what is cybersecurity broadly speaking? It's the process of protecting information by detecting and responding to cyber attacks that are carried out by threat actors. Or put another way, cybersecurity is the overall approach of keeping any and all of your digital assets safe. So that's your data, it's your accounts, it's your activity on the internet, it's payment information, it's all of that stuff. Anything that you want to keep protected from the eyes of like the general public or people who might do harm with it. So any physical or virtual devices that are accessible from the internet or by people are at risk. And that's the important thing because I don't know if you've ever heard people say that like the biggest security risk is yourself and your own habits. And I'll talk more about that later, but it's not just kind of what's the attack surface out on the internet that people might have access to, but it's also us, the people. Who are we sharing our information with? What are we doing to keep ourselves safe? So that's, it might seem like a lot of pressure, but that means we have a certain amount of control over our own safety. So, and it applies to all of your laptop and desktop computers and mobile devices. So this is any device that can connect to the internet. Why do we care? This might seem kind of obvious, but I just wanted to pause to say that cybersecurity is seldom one of the top concerns for, this says grassroots movements because I also give a version of this for the advocacy groups that I talk to. But grassroots movements, small organizations, nonprofits, and it's often something we think about from a work context, but then the standards that we set our work accounts to, we don't then translate to our personal accounts. So if our organizations require us to use multi-factor authentication to log into our accounts, we don't then go and audit all of our personal accounts and make sure that all of the ones we can enable multi-factor authentication for, we then go and do. And I'll get more into that later. So, but yeah, I mean, we all know cyber attacks can cost millions of dollars in damages, untold data loss, and less resilient organizations might not even be able to come back from a successful cyber attack. So it's really something worth thinking about and then revisiting on a regular cadence. Like, maybe you go through something once a year when you are doing other not so fun stuff like tax season or something, but having a schedule is a good idea. Now, who are threat actors? So this idea of threat actors is kind of broad and, they might be different types of individuals with different types of motivations. And at the end of the day, you just want to protect yourself from all of them. But different types of threat actors might be cyber criminals who might want your money through ransomware or holding your data hostage. They might try to gain access to bank accounts or indirectly by, trying to get you to take some kind of action to give them money. There are nation state actors that are either part of a government or that are hired by a government. We saw this, of course, like in the 2016 election with Russia trying to interfere with our elections. But of course, these things still go on today for the purposes of, propaganda or disruption, various things. There's hacktivists who want to make a point by disrupting or causing financial damage to an organization or infrastructure. They're usually targeting larger organizations. There's the thrill seekers or trolls. They're driven by various motivations. They're kind of unpredictable, but they just do it because they think it's fun. Lucky us that those people exist. And then there's insiders or competitors. So there might be those within an organization that are trying to leak information to disrupt it, or competing orgs might be trying to disrupt another organization. So I threw that in there because I thought it was kind of interesting to consider who the different types of individuals might be or groups. Then on the other side, let's talk about some of what the different types of cyber attacks might be. And I sort of put them on a rating from annoying to catastrophic, but they're all bad, right? We should be considering all of them. But there are certain types of cyber attacks that we want to be more concerned about. So on the annoying side of the scale, you've got spyware or malware, and these things are apps or browser extensions that record your behavior or give your information to somebody else without your consent. So that's one type of attack, right? Then you've got viruses, which is malicious code, usually in attachments that you either download from a website that's trying to pass itself off as legitimate, or from things like phishing emails. Then once they're embedded on your system, they disrupt your system. They might slow it down. They might, again, take your information, pass it off to someone else on the internet, various things. And that, of course, is bad, and we want to prevent that. Then there's phishing. This is kind of the main vehicle by which you might get a virus, or it might get you to pass off your login credentials or personally identifiable information to somebody else. And that is by posing as a legitimate entity to gain your trust. And so this is mostly by email is what we think of this as, but it could be through other means like phone calls or texts or others. And then finally, there's ransomware, which is completely locking your files to extort money. Now, if you have rigorous backups and you feel confident that at any given moment your computer has regular backups that are taken, then this one isn't as much of a concern, but it's still disruptive, and it's still kind of it creates a target. You know what I mean? It sort of like makes you a target that then you have to do a lot of work to uncompromise your system and change your passwords and get yourself back to a safe position. So yeah, so each type of attack has its own warning signs and its remediation strategies, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about next. So how do we stop cyber attacks, right? They cost time, money, loss of data, and the kind of the sad truth is it's impossible to prevent cyber attacks. This is sort of a risk management concept. Attempts to gain our access to our accounts, get our money, influence us with misinformation. These things happen all the time, and we only notice them when they're successful, right? So there are automated softwares that sort of like crawl through the internet and try to attack accounts and websites and organizations on a consistent basis. And we don't always see those unless we have monitoring software like Barracuda, or there are other tools out there that you can sort of monitor your network and see some of those attempts. But for our personal accounts, these are also happening too. And sometimes if we have posted information about our account and that gets picked up by some organization, they might start selling our data to other people. So that's not to scare you. It's just to sort of say, like, it's very broad, and so our strategies to fight these things also need to be very broad. So what we should be thinking about is how to make ourselves resistant or resilient to cyber attacks. And like I mentioned before, this takes a certain amount of vigilance and good habits, but once you get those good habits in place, then you don't have to carry as much of that anxiety or that risk anymore. So let's take a look at the ways that we can protect ourselves from the different types of cyber attacks. So we'll just go down the same list. The first one is spyware malware. So anti-malware software for your computer is a good idea to install, and also to uninstall anything that's unnecessary. So if you go down your applications folder on a Mac, or if you go to your programs and features on Windows, and there are things that you don't recognize, now I'll say that with a point of caution, which is there are some things you might not recognize that are actually running your system, right? But if you go through and you see something by an unrecognized publisher or developer and you're like, I don't remember installing that, just going out and cleaning some of those things out is a good idea. And there's also a program called Malwarebytes that I'll talk a little bit more about. So there's some software you can use to run as needed to look for these things. For viruses, there's antivirus software that is helpful, and to become sensitized to being able to recognize the legitimacy of the sources that you're getting your software from. Then there's phishing. The remediation for this, or the remedy for this one, is to recognize phishing attempts and improving your security posture, which I'll dig more deeply into security posture and some strategies you can take to improve that. And then finally, ransomware, all of the above. And then, like I said, make sure you have a solid backup strategy for your files. So digging a little bit more deeply into these, Anti-malware software and antivirus software, there are some that do both, but I kind of recommend having two different things just to kind of make sure you're extra covered. I really like the free tool by Malwarebytes, which is for Windows and Mac, and you can run it as needed if you notice anything unusual. So this will also find browser extensions that might be like, you know, um, you click the link on a website and now it's like trying to offer you coupons all the time, but it's also like secretly tracking your browsing behavior and like, giving it off to people who might sell it or something. So Malwarebytes is something you can just open up, run, it'll tell you what's there, and then quarantine it or show you where it is so you can delete it. And anti-malware software is not really needed for mobile devices, but also just go in every once in a while and look at your browser extensions and uninstall those too. Then antivirus software, I kind of like AVG. It's a free tool. A lot of these will try to they'll try to get you to sign up for the premium one when you download it, but you can just keep clicking no thanks, and then you can get the sort of basic free level, so you don't have to pay for it. And then you can set up an automatic schedule for your virus scans.
Hey, Eileen, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
When I was growing up, the big thing was that Windows operating system was much more fallible towards, virus
Susceptible,
attacks,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And Mac, on the other hand, wasn't.
Mhm.
So you're suggesting that, some of the anti-malware thing is really coming through the browser.
Yeah, for anti-malware, and it's all malicious
Right.
programs. It's kind of splitting hairs a little bit, breaking out anti-malware and or malware and viruses.
Okay.
But yeah, especially browsers on a Mac are especially susceptible because they're accessing the internet like anything else, and they
Right.
allow you to customize them with these extensions.
Right.
But also viruses for Mac OS do happen. So um, I'm also kind of familiar with that, and I don't have any data to point to about like how susceptible each platform is, but the truth is that they still do happen. There's still vulnerabilities that they find
Right.
for Mac OS, and they regularly release security updates for that very reason.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would recommend if you have Mac OS, don't think that, oh, I'm good. Like Mac OS is safe and I shouldn't have any precautions. I still think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then along with antivirus software, make sure to update your operating system on your mobile device and your computer frequently. So, it can be tempting because it's disruptive, like, oh, I'll deal with those updates later. And then all of a sudden there's been, 5 sets of security patches that have been released and, a bunch of 0-day vulnerabilities they found. And now you're open to all of them, right? Also, keep in mind that after a certain devices stop being supported at some point. So after they release a couple new versions of this is sort of like, it's a kind of planned obsolescence, but it's just kind of how the development cycle happens. At some point, they'll stop providing security releases for your devices, and then it's a good idea to not let that go on too long before you start to plan for replacement. So this is why we have, like life cycle for company laptops, because they do slow down after a certain amount of time. We want the user experience to be good, but also we need to ensure that they can still get security patches. Let's see, did I leave anything out there? Oh, and apps can have security updates too. So if there's a way in the App Store or the Google Play Store to just check and make sure that your apps are getting updates as well. Sometimes there will be things that you want to catch there too. Okay, so now we're going to dig a little bit more into this concept of a security posture. So a security posture, broadly speaking, is how resilient and protected you are against attempted cyber attacks. So the first thing we're going to look at is account security. And there's kind of a few things you want to focus on. The first one is make your passwords stronger. If you've heard the term passphrases, this is an attempt to get people to make your passwords longer and more memorable rather than shorter and more complex. So the conventional wisdom used to be throw in a bunch of uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols in there. And you don't have to have a ton of characters. You just have to make it like more incomprehensible, I guess. But the new conventional wisdom is that length equals strength. So that means the longer your password is, the harder it is to hack. So my example passphrase here is big buttons on a miniature coat. It's long, it's very easy to remember, and you don't have to remember all of them because of password managers, but at least it's not like, inspiration with like an exclamation point and an @ sign and like uppercase, lowercase, like you're never going to remember that, right? So it just because your passwords are stronger doesn't mean it has to make your life harder, is my point. Also, remember your home Wi-Fi networks, and if you're responsible for Wi-Fi at your organization, keep that in mind too with like guest passwords and things. Because a lot of times people will be like, oh, we're always fighting with the guest password is like, oh, it's too complex and nobody can remember it. It's like you can just make it longer and then change it on a regular basis. So, password managers. Is everyone here using a pass manager? Are you familiar with password managers like KeePass, LastPass, 1Password?
I have used it, and then, once the version was changed as some free period was over,
Yeah,
I kind of gave up on it. But
like
I
a
think,
trial or something.
yeah.
Yeah.
You recommend it?
Yes, I absolutely recommend password managers because they also provide some other features too that secure your entire password database, like they'll encrypt it for you. But it's much better than writing it down or, like we all know that the movies where they're like, oh, they were trying to break into somebody's computer and there's like a sticky note under someone's keyboard. And I
Mhm.
don't think that's as prevalent as they show it in the movies, but like, just anything is better than that. But password managers will secure all of your accounts, and all you have to remember is one master password to decrypt the entire database. And then you can also access it from different locations. So mine is stored locally on my phone with the KeePass app because I'm a
Okay.
little paranoid about keeping all my stuff in the cloud, but it's just as encrypted to them as it is to you, the end user. But yeah, I like the KeePass local app on my phone.
Okay.
The downside to that is, if I lose my phone, then I have it backed up to my Google Drive, but it's a little complicated. And so I'm probably overcomplicating it. You can just go to LastPass and use the free version, and it's much, much better than having a physical notebook where you've got all your stuff written down.
Many of the financial institutions, like credit card companies, have started using, virtual pass options, because
Hmm.
that's how I have on almost all my apps now.
Hmm.
Like but they store a completely different version, and you can type in what you think is your password everywhere, but
Right.
in what they tell me is that the communication protocol, as it goes from my phone to, the ethernet, it's encrypted through their something like a LastPass or something like that, a
Hmm.
virtual
Hmm.
pass. So
Yeah, we use something called Secret Server, which is
okay.
another password manager
Right.
at our workplace, and it'll let you copy the password to your clipboard and then paste it into your
Right.
browser,
Right.
whatever account you need to log into.
Right.
So it's a little bit more convenient too. So if you need to have service accounts with really long passwords, um, you know, this needs to be extra secure. So it's a 40-character password and extremely complex. Then I don't
Right.
actually have to type it out. I can just copy it from Secret
Okay.
Server.
Right.
Yeah. Um, Also, a couple extra notes I had in here. Try to avoid shared accounts whenever possible, because then as people come and go, it's likely that the account won't be changed, or if things are shared with multiple people, that the access doesn't get audited. So the best practice, of course, is for everyone to have their own individual account and to grant access to that account. Um, so that's kind of part of what they call zero trust um, approach of just giving people exactly the amount of amount of access that they need and no more than that. And then also, as soon as someone leaves an organization, you deactivate their account, and then they lose access to everything at once. And then I already mentioned multi-factor authentication for as many apps and accounts that support it, including personal things. Um, Yes, and then keep your account recovery methods up to date. So if you need to reset your password for something, you've got your current email address and your phone number that you're still using. And then I just threw in a kind of side note in there. Try to avoid security questions whenever possible because they're more easily guessable by someone else. Okay. So we talked about multi-factor authentication. The reason, of course, for that is if someone has your password, they still can't log in because they need the device that approves the login attempt, right? And then do set up alternate email addresses. Don't use security questions. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about protecting your data on your devices and then on your network traffic. So you can encrypt your personal device. Windows, I think it's still BitLocker. I'm not sure because I don't have a personal laptop at the moment, but you can encrypt your hard drive, which basically means if someone tries to take your, if they, let's say your laptop gets stolen, they try to take your hard drive out of your laptop and plug it into another computer to get the files. They can't do that without the decryption password.
Okay.
So that's a really useful layer of security if someone tries to kind of get a backdoor into your files. And then on Mac OS, it's called File Vault, and you can turn that on, and you don't see any difference in the experience because your decryption password is the same one that you use to log into your account. So
Okay.
you still get the same username and password. You put in the password. It then decrypts your hard drive and logs you into the operating system at the same time. And then VPN. So VPN is a very popular topic. You probably see like ads on YouTube for them all the time, and there's a lot of discourse about VPNs protecting your network traffic. But I think it's kind of important to keep in mind what VPNs do and what they don't do. So, you know, a lot of times people will say, oh, use a VPN so that your internet service provider doesn't have access to your network traffic. Well, if you're using a VPN, you're basically going through the VPN service to your ISP out to the internet. So instead of giving your network information to your ISP, you're then giving it to the VPN company. So there's really no way to truly be anonymous on the internet while browsing. There are some ways where you can make yourself harder to find, but it's still not going to make you 100% anonymous. The things that VPNs are helpful for is if you are on a completely unprotected network. So let's say you're at a coffee shop with very, very rudimentary Wi-Fi security. If you enable a VPN, you'll be a little bit safer through the protocols that that VPN uses.
Right.
But if you're at home and you have a pretty, you know, you have WPA2 Wi-Fi protocol, you have a strong password setup, you're probably good. VPN is not going to give you anything extra above that. And then the other thing that VPNs do is they you can make it look like you're coming from somewhere else in the world than you actually are. So IP addresses are a it's basically an address that shows where your device is accessing the internet from a specific location. So this is why people say, oh, you can use a VPN to get the Netflix shows that are airing in Germany, right? That's because your device looks like it's using an IP address that would be in Germany. So if you are concerned about people knowing where you are, and it would take a pretty knowledgeable person to get at that information, but if you're concerned about that, VPNs can also make it look like you're somewhere else. So
That one, Eileen, I found it. Some networks, like YouTube TV, for example,
mhm.
VPN does not work. You can try. They figure out exactly where you're at.
Mm.
And I've never understood like how they do it. Probably they take the device address, so
Yeah. Well, the
and
MAC address shouldn't be location specific, but yeah, there must be.
the device, the Wi-Fi device, so
Oh, yeah.
they
Uh-huh.
take that to figure out what your location is, especially if you're in another country.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of like Netflix and everything, I think they ignore it. They just look at your browser IP address.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends. Like some of the security protocol does not give you that much anonymity with
Yeah.
VPNs. So
Yeah, and the intricacies of sort of network,
Right.
infrastructure and how that whole process works is a little bit outside my scope of knowledge, um, but yeah, you do get asked about VPNs a lot, like, oh, should I be using this everywhere I go? Should I be using this to browse the network at all? And I think it comes from a good place to be concerned about the safety of, your network activity, but it doesn't provide like the magic solution for everything, which I think is how people kind of market it these days,
Market
because they
space.
want you to think that it's really safe, so you
Right.
buy it. Yeah. And then finally, backing up your data. So I recommend picking one and only one cloud storage location to store your files, and then just making that account really secure. And that's partly for, if you focus your security efforts on one thing rather than a bunch of things, then you're more likely to have robust security on that one thing. But it's also just for ease of finding your files. If you've got backups stored in 3 different locations, then one of them might be more up to date and the others are really out of date, and then it stops being as useful as it could be. And then don't share files with unencrypted flash drives or external hard drives, the so-called sneaker net. Um, Although, there are some specific locations when there is a very tight protocol around sharing files in that way. It's sort of like trading risks with one method for another, right? So if you've got a flash drive that's kind of always in your bag and it could fall out and it's unencrypted, then like someone else could have your files, right?
Right.
But if it's like this flash drive is stored in a lockbox and we only use it for this one thing, that's a different story, right? Um, and then I just like to, I'm a Google Drive person, so I really like Google Drive for desktop, because then you can also pick a couple folders on your computer where you store all your files, and then have Google Drive back up those folders. So that if something happens to your laptop, you've still got those in Google Drive that you can recover. And then make sure, like I mentioned before, to regularly review access to your data. So if you've got a shared account with delegated access, make sure that the people who should have access to that still have access. Or if you're sharing files with external folks and they don't need access to those files anymore, go back in and, remove their access after they don't need it anymore. Let's see here. What do I have here? Just checking my speaker notes so I don't leave anything out. Yeah. Oh, and then I think drag this out just a little bit. Okay. So another thing that people get asked about a lot, especially in like advocacy work, is encrypted messaging apps. Like, how do I make sure I'm end-to-end encrypted? And the thing to remember, this is kind of like what I said about the VPN discussion. Not everything needs to be secure. So,
Right.
I wouldn't say that it's necessary to completely stop texting and only use an end-to-end encrypted messaging app, right? But if you need to do something that's really sensitive, um, don't send it over SMS, right? There are other more secure protocols like Signal or WhatsApp, especially, well, actually exclusively if you're messaging someone from that platform and they're also using that platform. That's how you get end-to-end encryption. So if you send a Signal message to someone's phone number through SMS, then it's only encrypted on one side, right? Same
Right.
thing with email providers. So people will ask like, oh, should I be using Proton Mail? Is that more secure than Gmail? And it's like, well, generally speaking, if you're just sending regular emails, it's not that much of a concern. But if you are sending really sensitive information and you're sending from, let's say, Gmail, which has a certain set of security protocols, to another Gmail account, then you're good, right? Because it's staying within that same environment. But if you're emailing a Hotmail address, then your message, as soon as it leaves Gmail, is only as secure as the email provider that it arrives
Right.
in. So that's just worth considering. But generally speaking, I don't think that for most purposes, especially if you're sending within an organization, you should be good. But if you're sending things personally and they contain really sensitive information, then it's worth thinking like, is this the most secure method I could be sending this? There's also a confidential mode, which I like in Gmail. If you're a Gmail person, and if you turn that on, it will allow you to send a locked version of the email, and then the person has
Okay.
to unlock it with a code that you send to their phone number via text. So it's like
Okay.
2 levels that they have to use to get the information. And then you can provide an expiration date beyond which no one can access it after that point.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's like a little lock icon if you open an
Okay.
sort
I've
of a Gmail
seen it,
draft.
but yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's worth testing out just to see how it works. And then finally, this is more about physical security, but just keep track of your devices. Make sure that, you're not leaving them out unlocked to run a presentation in a conference center or something like that. Just make sure that you kind of know where they are and that you have a regular habit for knowing where they are. And then specifically, I just wanted to drill this point home. Make sure that you lock your computer and your phone when you're not using them and have a passcode for your phone. I still have a lot of support interactions with people where they will pull up their phone and there's like no lock code whatsoever. So I know we IT professionals are experienced in this area. And of course, we would never do such a thing, but I just like to really drive that point home. Okay, so now we're going to talk about phishing just a little bit. And this was my favorite image to make because I had to put in 3D computer character holding a fish. And the cursed images that I got from that, it was like fish computer hybrids. It was weird. So this was the best one out of many iterations, and that mouth still looks super weird for my liking. So
I'm grateful you didn't use fish with the P, the group, the Rob group.
oh yeah. Yeah, that I can only imagine what Firefly would have done with that prompt. Okay, so types of phishing. Email phishing is of course the most common, but there are some other types too. Thankfully, a lot of phone calls get filtered out now. They say like scam likely or something. But vishing is the term that's used for phishing via phone call. So they might try to convince you that they're a service provider or someone that you know or whatever. Smishing is phishing plus SMS, and that's just like when they get you to try to, there's some urgent thing you have to do or they're going to lock your account, click here. The kind of helpful thing about smishing is that you can't disguise URLs with hyperlinks like you can in rich text or in emails. So you've probably gotten those texts where you see like, oh, click here to renew your information with the ACLU, and then the URL is just like a string of nonsense, right? So you can kind of tell that it's taking you somewhere you don't want to go, but still dangerous. And then spear phishing is specifically when they research really specific information about you to try to convince you that you know them. And then whale phishing is when they pose as someone important or high up in an organization. So like, hi, this is the president. I need your help right now. I'm in a meeting. Can you buy some iTunes gift cards and then send me all the codes for them? Stuff like that. Which is something that happened to us a few times, and it's really annoying.
Once I had an issue where it was an app for wiring money,
Mhm.
and it was a PayPal company, and the hackers hacked the service database, for any help desk calls, whatever system they were using.
Yeah.
The hackers hacked that. So, and they called me the same day I had made a service call. And they said, I'm calling because that issue was not resolved.
hmm
And so they called me pretending to be that company. And because they had to still resolve, they hacked my account and withdrew money right after the call.
Wow.
And we finally figured out that the hack was actually, because it was not a hack on the PayPal, like the account side, it was
Mhm.
on the back office side.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes the frustrating part is like tracking down the source of the
Right.
issue, because they're really disruptive and terrible. Like apart from just the loss of data, it's just really anxiety inducing and you lose a lot of time like dealing
Right.
with this stuff.
And it to me it was like literally some whale fishing in the sense they had the information that I had made a call that morning,
Right.
and they had the information that I had, like, so they
They
had
like
enough.
hijacked your support ticket. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Literally, that's what they did. They
Yeah.
hijacked the support ticket.
Yeah. They get creative, that's for sure. I won't spend too much time on this, but I'll share the slide deck too, because I don't know how few the picture is a little bit small in here, but I wanted to briefly talk about how to recognize a malicious email. There's kind of like 5 things you want to look out for. The first one is the email address legit? So the domain of the email sender should be something you recognize, like, google.com or whatever. The email address should end in something very recognizable. 2 is examine the URLs of the links before clicking them. And what you can do, if you don't already know this, is you can mouse over a link without clicking it. And then in the bottom of your browser, it will show you a preview of where it's going to take you before you click. So that's a way to just make extra sure if you're like, I think this is taking me where I want to go, but I just really want to check. Or if it's hyperlinked text that doesn't show the URL, you can check it out that way. 3 is, does it create a sense of urgency? Now, of course, there are going to be some things that need your attention in the course of life and work and whatever. But if it's like, we're going to lock your account in 24 hours unless you take this action, then it's like, why are they trying to get me stressed out about this? It's probably for some kind of ulterior motive. 4, is it asking you for personal information? So obviously you don't want to provide bank information or things like that, but sometimes they'll have you click a link and then it'll have a very convincing looking login screen, right? Like, oh, this looks like the Google login screen, but then you've put in your password because it looked legit and now they have your password, right? So generally speaking, be less trustful of things that are trying to get personal information out of you. And then 5 is there just anything kind of off about it? Like, this person that I know is sending me this email, but it doesn't sound like them. It's too formal or it's got a bunch of typos in it. Something just seems kind of wrong. Trust that intuition and use that to look into it a little bit more before you immediately take an action. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to move on to just some general advice about organizing and simplifying your life. And the more straightforward your accounts and the all of the various things that you use that carry risk with them are, then the easier it is going to be to keep them secure, to keep yourself secure. So my first advice that I generally give people is organize your files. And that sounds incredibly pedestrian, but just create a basic folder structure and move everything into those folders. And then delete or archive files you don't need anymore. And that makes the audit, your security audit of who has access to those files, much easier. And then it's less likely for them to be lost. And then with simplify, I just mean use less things. And I'll get into this with my next part, which is kind of like this little worksheet that you can use to start doing your own security audit. But if you're using multiple things for the same type of service, consolidate down and use less things. And then it makes it easier to keep those fewer number of things secure. And if you do need to use multiple apps, which of course is necessary, like in the case of I use Teams for work, but then I use Facebook Messenger for my personal chats, just be aware of the different functions that those things serve in your life. So this is another one of my favorite computer images, the sort of like the like, oh my gosh. So where do we start with all this? Because this is a lot of information. So just remember that you don't have to do everything all at once, but doing something is better than taking no action, right? And sometimes there's no help desk that can support all of your personal stuff. So maybe like talk to a friend or a colleague about, the things that you're doing to keep your stuff secure, without sharing like, passwords, but just kind of the approach that you're taking, and then you might get ideas from them, and then it just kind of gets you, I find it's easier to reflect things off of somebody else than just kind of doing it privately in a vacuum. Find that person who's IT in your family and ask them if it's not already you, because frequently I'm sure for all of us in the room, we get asked those questions a lot
Yes.
from family. So this is my cybersecurity worksheet. This is sort of an idea I came up with for myself, and I just put this in my like personal files on my own Google Drive. So what you can do is open up a spreadsheet and write down as rows all of the different services you use. Where is all my data stored? Where do I have an account, right? It doesn't have to be exhaustive. Just start with the things that are really obvious, the things that you really rely on. So in my example, I put Gmail, Facebook Messenger, Venmo, Discord, Amazon, things that are like really obvious to me, right? And then on the columns, you're going to start asking yourself some questions about these accounts. So have I updated the password recently, and have I made it a passphrase, right? So is it a secure password? Is it something more than just the password I use for everything with the number at the end incremented, right? So that are they using different passwords? Have I enabled multi-factor authentication? Is it secure or encrypted? And this might be a little different depending on what the thing is, right? What do I use this for? And do I still need this? Because you might look through some of these things and be like, wow, there's a lot more than I realized, and I don't need to use some of these things anymore. I can go in and close some of these accounts, especially if they're accounts you don't use anymore that have like credit card details stored, because then that website might be hacked or compromised, and then your credit card information is leaked, right? So that's just, sometimes our data goes out in the internet and then we're not even remembering that it's there anymore, and then it becomes part of some data breach that we hear about on the news, and that's another headache to deal with. So that is the end of my slides, and at this point I would love to know if there are any questions.
I had one quick suggestion to make, and
Yeah.
because this is getting also recorded. I had one of the craziest thing happen to me on my Gmail account one day.
Mhm.
I got about 300 or 400, I forget what the number, it was in that range, within an hour, emails thanking me, thank you for subscribing to our meat, newsletter. So thank you for subscribing to our grocery, like all kinds of gifts and things that I did not sign up for. And
Mhm.
they were all thank you for subscribing to, and some of them were legit websites.
Mhm.
And I kept on, reporting them as spam and
Yeah.
unsubscribing,
Right.
which made it worse because, the first 15 minutes when I was unsubscribing. So Gmail has this, those of you who use Gmail, when you report spam, it gives an option that you report spam and do you want to unsubscribe, right?
Right.
And most of us typically do that. And my recommendation that I found out from Google themselves or Gmail themselves is not to do that unsubscribe.
Oh, that's
Because
good to
what
know.
it does is it sends a notification back to the phishing or any of these malware companies that you're legit, because you
Right,
are
that you'll
actually,
respond. You're a real
that you're
person.
a human who's responding to it. So your email address that they were trying to get hold of, is not a bot address or anything like that. It's a legit human behind it.
Mm.
So they automatically take note of that and use that information to do something more. And so now I've, like when I report spam, I never unsubscribe or use that option, because you
Mhm.
never know, what these spam things, it's just another extension of nuisance, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and that situation could be scary because, if these emails start flooding and you're like, oh my gosh, what do they have
Right.
access to? And in
Right.
that case, they don't really have access to
I
anything.
think.
They just know that you have, or they don't know you, but they
Right.
know that this email address exists, and they're just
Exists,
kind of
right. Right.
flooding it with messages.
Messages.
But yeah, were they coming from the same address or different
No,
addresses?
they were completely made up addresses, and
Yeah, so it was just
they did
generating. Yeah.
hack. In that, within 24 hours, my credit card was hacked.
Oh no.
So it was and that is because I did not know, and I kept on, like, where's this coming from? And I would just go and, constantly try to get rid of it.
Hmm.
And but it was from, literally 300 different ways. Probably if I looked at the metadata, it would tell me which server it was coming through. And most of these usually come from Eastern Russia. And some of, from 2015, most of the things that I've had is, it comes from from, Chechnya, all these different places out there.
Mhm.
So, and it's part of their, I loved your first few slides where you were talking about different actors that are there. What I've discovered is a lot of them, especially during the election season, they practice on they practice their trade, if you will, of hacking by trying it on smaller clients before they do the bigger one. So
Yeah. So we don't want to be a test market for that.
right. I'm sorry,
I'll stick to the McRibs and the
That's right.
the sandwiches.
Do y'all have any other questions? I'm sorry, I had to share. So this was very, very informative, Eileen. I
Yeah, I'm
really
glad.
loved your slides. I mean, it was simple and usable information.
Yeah, thank you. And I if there's a newsletter that goes out or
Yes.
I'm happy to share the link to the slides because they're viewable. And if you do have any other questions, feel free to email me. I'm
Yeah, if you can send
happy to
me a
talk about
link,
stuff.
I can put it in the newsletter and also, put it on the chat thing. I don't know how much of it goes into the
Sure,
YouTube
yeah.
video, but they can definitely access that.
Yeah, let me get the link and throw it in the chat here.
Awesome.
It's a little long
Awesome.
because Google, but there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you.
And
This
yeah,
was
I really
wonderful.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This was wonderful.
awesome. All
Thank
right.
you all.
Yeah, have
Yep.